Mr. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Alderman Kennedy.
Here.
Alderman Boyd.
Present.
Alderwoman Howard.
Present.
Alderman Arnowitz.
Here.
Alderwoman Hubbard. Alderwoman Murphy. Alderman Ogilvy.
Here.
Alderwoman Navarro.
Here.
Alderwoman Middlebrook. Alderman Vaccaro. Six present, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, 6 present. We have a quorum. Thanks to those members who are here today. We've got 2 bills on the agenda, Board Bill 168 and Board Bill 270. I'm going to recognize Alderwoman Howard first on Board Bill 168.
Good afternoon, Chairman Ogilvy and esteemed colleagues. You have before you Board Bill 168 that was introduced, and it replaces Ordinance 70475. The only difference here is that there's been a change in the procedures for reporting to different agencies. In the previous bill, it was mistakenly thought that CREA had some enforcement capabilities, so they were eliminated from that. And then it's also mentioning the Civilian Oversight Board as a place for people to report. So this bill just clarifies some of the things that were in the previous bill and makes it something that the Division of Personnel can enforce and distribute to all employees.
Okay, Alderman Howard, do you have any other speakers on this bill today?
I do not.
Okay, we can take questions then from the committee. Alderman Kennedy?
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Now, where are the changes?
The changes,
Specifically?
I don't have the other bill.
Oh, you,
There was a marked up
the previous bill, the one that's currently in effect, the current ordinance?
I don't have that. The
Right,
changes aren't marked in here because we heard this once before, and it wasn't voted out, it was put on hold.
Would you like me to get a copy of the ordinance, the underlying ordinance that's being changed?
You want the marked bill?
Is it complicated that you just can't point out where the changes were?
It's not indicated on the bill.
Not on this copy that's been out.
Okay, I wasn't trying to make it complicated. I was just trying.
I apologize, I will go and get a copy in case it's changed. I don't recall what the changes exactly. I'll be at that. So, in here. Where it says, it's hereby repealed the whistleblower law. So the changes.
Okay,
It's just replacing those sections.
those sections. All right.
Yeah, it should be all in bold.
I'm fine. You don't have to go get it. I've had my question answered, Mr. Vice Chair. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Alderman Kennedy. Alderman Boyd, do you have any questions?
Yes, I'm a little bit confused. I remember hearing the bill, and I
Right.
remember talking about CREA and certain aspects of the bill. Maybe it shouldn't have been in the bill. But there was an original bill introduced. Was that Board Bill 168 originally introduced?
This is the same bill.
Okay, so if we make modifications to a bill, then we need to do amendments to the bill, which
There
would-
were no modifications from the time it was presented last time.
So CREA is still in here.
No.
Okay.
The CREA is in the ordinance 70475, which has been repealed.
Okay, the whole ordinance is repealed.
Right.
Got
And
it.
this
Okay.
has the corrections and makes that.
But I thought that we had some discussion during that hearing about different aspects of the bill. I remember Alderwoman Navarro having some issues with the bill in certain portions, and then we kind of put it on
And
hold.
I've met
then,
with
wait a minute, let me just
personnel
finish.
since
Let me
then.
just finish my
Oh,
thought.
I'm sorry.
Because
Okay.
I'm over 50 now, so I don't retain as much as I used to. So
You and me both, brother.
so I thought that there was some recommendations on taking certain things out of the original bill so that we could come up with a cleaner bill. And if that is what we did, then we should have a committee substitute. That's where I'm going with this.
Well, the attorneys over in personnel reviewed this and decided that it was fine the way it was, and they were working with it the way it was. And it meets their needs.
The last time we heard the bill, I specifically remember reading inside the bill, 168.
Right.
CREA being mentioned specifically
Because
in
it
the bill.
had some of the strikeouts, didn't it?
I'm just kind of confused. I'm just
I don't
thinking
mean to
that there was
confuse you.
language.
It's just that I have met with personnel, and we talked about some of the suggested changes, and they deemed that it was unnecessary. And there are attorneys over there, and I thought that since they're the ones that have to implement this,
Right. What I thought, okay. I don't remember CREA being in the original ordinance. I thought we were attempting to add CREA into this particular ordinance.
no, because
I'm-
CREA has no
I have it
enforcement
backwards.
capability.
Okay,
Okay, would the board attorney, would you mind?
okay.
So the ordinance that's being repealed makes CREA one of the reporting agencies. all
Okay.
right? This
Oh, okay.
This
Got it.
removes CREA as one of the reporting
Got it.
agencies. And the questions that Alderwoman Navarro had, those related to state enforcement of this and
Okay.
state regulations. Initially, when Alderwoman Howard and I had spoken with personnel, we basically spoke to the wrong person. We did get clarification, and that this actually will assist with them being able to follow those regulations, because right now, the way that it's set up, to follow their own regulations, because the way that it's set up, the CREA prevents or skews their ability to do that. So this would actually bring them into complete compliance and able to follow everything.
Mr. Chairman, no further questions.
Thank you. Mr. Gali, if you could just stay there if I could just interject maybe for clarity, since we now have the existing ordinance in front of us and the bill that repeals and replaces the ordinance. Can we just walk through, I see that CREA is being removed as one of the agencies to report to. Are there any other substantial changes to the existing ordinance?
One other agency, and do you have a copy of the ordinance up
Right
here?
here.
Or no, the
The old one?
Yeah.
Here, right here. It was, the other one that was added was the civil service system.
And that was in
No,
section.
it wasn't civil service, it was the. Proper government action by members of the St. Louis. Look at that on the new one.
So the auditing officials of the
Members of
Department
the
of
St. Louis
Personnel and the governmental action to another on investigations. So you have that. You have the following in good faith and habits. Title protection. So we're just taking out.
That's what you're saying, but this is repealed. Got it.
Auditing officials. Right, so it is at the section 3 of the ordinance, which is on page 3 of the ordinance,
So section 3 of the ordinance, okay.
Number 1.
under section 3A, subsection 1.
Right, that's where we removed,
The
yeah.
Korea.
St. Louis, and then it's reported to MEC rather than the ethics compliance officer because
We don't have one yet.
we don't have an ethics compliance
Right.
officer. They
Okay.
put that position in here, but it was never funded nor made whole. And then on number 3. Hold on, we're still on section.
Employees, metropolitan.
Mr. Vice Chair, could I just point out in the bill, I just want, section E.
I'm sorry, wait, hang on, let's let him get, it's okay, let's let him get through there.
Change the division of police.
Yes, the section 3 was changed to the Division of Police and the Department of Public Safety
And then
and the Executive Director.
5 was removed.
And 5 was removed.
Okay, say that again, sorry. Say,
So if you have the ordinance in front of you,
yep,
and you look at, I'm sorry,
This is the new.
if you look at, was it page 3, section 3, beginning with paragraph A, subsection 1, where it says the Civil Rights Enforcement Agency,
right, that comes out,
correct.
right.
And then 2, the St. Louis Ethics Compliance Officer, since we do not have one, that was changed to the MEC.
Okay,
And then the 4th is the Division of Police.
Division of St.
St.
Louis,
Louis, yes.
under the Department of Public Safety, are the Executive Director of the Civilian Oversight Board.
Right, so currently in the ordinance, it says St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department.
okay,
It just provides more clarity.
okay. And those are all the changes from the existing ordinance? Okay,
Except where there's reference to those agencies again in the bill,
okay,
or
If
in the
they're
ordinance.
brought up again, they're changed, the titles.
got it. Okay, next up then would be Alderman Arnowitz. Any questions?
Not at this time.
Okay. Alderwoman Navarro, any questions? Or you can point out that there's a typo, and I think we can do a quick amendment to remove that.
Sure, I just wanted to point out that section 8 appears on both pages 6 and 7. It's a savings clause, so it looks like one of the updates,
Not in my copy,
not in your copy?
yeah.
I have section 6, section 7, 8, 9, 10, and section 8 repeated again.
Oh, at the end.
Yeah.
You're looking
Okay.
at the,
Yep,
Yeah,
I
that's
see
what I
it.
mean.
I see where you are.
Okay,
And then
go ahead.
I just
Yeah.
want to, I recognize that we're just making a small change to the overall whistleblower law. I think, if we were to come back and amend this, if we were to look at this at one point, again, I think it's important for us to consider that what's happening at the state is essentially an erosion of employees' rights. And I would not want our city statute to necessarily mimic those practices. So anything we can do to strengthen this. I understand what we're doing today is trying to clarify the process that
And
is
strengthen
available.
it, because if we have something out there that doesn't have positions that don't exist,
Right, I mean, I would point out, under the definition of retaliation, we continue to use the standard that an employee has to show that the adverse action resulted from an employee's protected activity, and that's just not nearly as strong of language, as what we've had before, which was a contributing factor. And that's what's been at issue at the state, and that is an erosion of employees' rights under this. I realize that language is not what's being changed at this point, so I'm not going to make a bigger issue of that, but I just want us to recognize that what's happening at the state level is not something that we want to repeat here for
and
citizens
I
in
don't
St.
think
Louis.
we are.
Whatever current policy is right now.
It's
just
what
does
the
not
current
change
policy
the
is. It doesn't change anything.
That's all I have, thank
So
you.
can we
Okay.
amend that and
Yeah,
strike
so,
section 8?
yes, so we might need Alderman Boyd for this, but I'm going to,
Okay.
if I refer everyone to page 7, the very end, starting at line 17, there's a typo where section 8 is repeated. So I'm going to move that
I need
on
6.
page 7, from line 7 to line 22, we strike out all of those lines
From line 17 to 22.
from line 17 to 22 on page 7, removing the erroneous section 8 typo. I've made the motion. Is there a,
I second.
okay. Feel free to ask a question.
Right,
Yes,
so, okay, you want to strike out everything from line 17 through 22?
exactly.
On page 7?
Yes. Because that paragraph is,
It's redundant.
it's in there twice. Yes.
Ah, gotcha. Appreciate it. All right. I have understanding, thank you.
Okay. So it's been moved and seconded. Mr. Clerk, will you please call the roll on the amendment?
Alderman Kennedy.
Aye.
Alderman Boyd.
Aye.
Alderwoman Howard.
Aye.
Alderman Arnowitz. Alderwoman Hubbard. Alderwoman Murphy. Alderman Ogilvy.
Aye.
Alderwoman Navarro.
Aye.
Alderwoman Middlebrook. Alderman Vaccaro. You have 6 aye votes, Mr. Chairman.
6 aye votes, the motion passes. I'm going to make a motion that we pass out Board Bill 168
As amended.
as amended with a due pass recommendation.
Second.
It's been a request for previous roll. Any objections to previous roll? Seeing no objections, Board Bill 168 as amended passes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Legislative Committee.
Okay, next
Sorry
up.
for the mix-up.
It's okay. Next up, I'll recognize Alderman Boyd on Board Bill 270. Has everybody who would like to speak on Board Bill 270 signed up now? Feel free to come sign up, and then we'll take the sign-up sheet up here. Okay, Alderman Boyd, please proceed.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Board Bill 270 is the city's minority inclusion bill, which is long overdue. There was a study done back in 2015, so most of the data is probably slightly outdated, but we have to go by what we have today. Before I get into the bill too much, I want to make sure that everybody is operating in the same space as far as minority inclusion and what we're talking about. So I wanted to have Otis come up and just kind of give us a general overview of what we're talking about when we talk about minority inclusion.
That sounds good. Mr. Williams, please.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair and committee. I'm Otis Williams, St. Louis Development Corporation, and under the St. Louis Development Corporation is the city's inclusion initiative, and we oversee the entire program, both that operates from the airport and the certification side of the house, but as well as the compliance side of the house, which operates at 1520. And what we do is to, for all things that provide for purchasing power or contracts associated with the city, we look to see whether or not the provider or those that are having benefit of the contract, whether they're meeting or having a good faith effort, if you will, to meet the city's goals as currently prescribed by the mayor's executive order. Originally, it was Executive Order 28. It has been amended a number of times, the last time amended by Mayor Cruson, which is Executive Order 59, I believe. But to get back to what the MBE program is and what it means as far as the city overall.
I'm sorry, can I ask a question?
Sure.
So I think it's important to understand we're currently doing this, and we've been doing it for 20 years or so under an executive order, correct?
Yeah, actually it began in 1997. Under
21 years, yes. So can you explain why we started with an executive order and why the goal is now to transition this to an ordinance?
You didn't start with an executive order.
Okay,
There are actually bills introduced in 1991 that did not pass. The executive order then reflected what was some of the intents in the bills that did not pass.
okay.
I would have relented to him for history anyway. Not being around at that time, I wouldn't have known that history.
Okay. But maybe, is there a substantial difference between operating under an executive order and operating under an ordinance in this field?
Well, obviously, the executive order is just that. It's an order by the chief executive of the municipality or the city, in this case. The ordinance, obviously, is, I won't call it a statute, but essentially a statute that sort of prescribes that it will be done. And so I think that's, I'm not a lawyer, but I think one is more enshrined than the other.
Okay. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
Okay.
May I add?
Sorry. Go ahead.
I'll let him finish. I wanted to add something to that point, but I can wait.
Let's add it now while we're on the subject. So feel free to go ahead.
You know, a mayor's executive order can change when the mayors change.
Right.
And they can change without a public process.
Right.
And then there's also a difficulty in executive orders to have penalties or to have some teeth in it. And so then an ordinance gives you all those other things. A public process can give you teeth into it and also allows for durability and consistency and continuity. It cannot change at the whim of a mayor who may come into the office or that particular mayor changing their mind the next year. So an ordinance does that.
Excellent. That's kind of the answer I was looking for.
And I guess to supplement that, we've been fortunate that all the mayors since 1997 has seen fit to amend or at least provide an amendment that would keep the executive order or at least the powers of the executive order intact. We have made some changes along the way, but it's been to I think the benefit of all that since that time. And so the reason that we recently went through a disparity study, and I think most folks who have a program would go through a disparity study, is to eliminate the risk of challenge legally by those who would have a problem with the goals that are set. And so essentially, the City of St. Louis is committed to essentially promoting a fair and open program, and that is essentially what this ordinance is indicating. So essentially what we are looking for is that we want to be sure that we have taken all the necessary, reasonable, and legal action, if you will, to alleviate documented disparity and ensure that all the businesses are afforded a maximum opportunity to participation in city contracting. And so that is the reason that I believe that we're trying to do this. And so are you going to get into the disparity? Okay. So essentially, our overall goal here is to just make sure that those who have a documented disparity, in fact, have a way forward to participation. And the one thing I want to make sure everyone understands is that we would periodically update our findings because now we think we have the tools to be able to understand the availability and of firms, as well as document what we have done as far as the past in contracting. And so we're committed to updating our findings on the disparity study in a periodic fashion going forward. And I think the ordinance so states that we intend to do that. So turn it back to the Alderman.
Okay. I would like to make a request, because there's a lot of categories in this bill. If we could kind of walk through in order of the categories so everybody understands it, and maybe Mr. Williams can stay close in case there's a question he can help.
Sure, and I will walk through certain pages to kind of highlight in the particular bill, but I want to say this, going back to the executive order and what Alderman Kennedy talked about, the difference between codifying something in an ordinance versus a mayor, particularly changing things. I've been out here for 15 years, and certainly for over 30 years, we've been putting forth a good faith effort. And we've been talking about 25% minority participation, 5% women. And I will submit to you that we've done a dismal job over the past 30 years of meeting those minimum standards. Because at the end of the day, there are goals and they are minimum standards. And where I come from, minimum standards are really not good enough. The other problem and challenge that we had with an executive order, again, there was no real enforcement piece. So a general contractor, he goes out there, it's a $10 million job, and he says, I looked, I couldn't find anybody, and it is what it is, and nothing really happens. Doing this ordinance today brings us into a better century. It cements the policy, and it states that the city of St. Louis is serious about minority participation. Also, understand throughout this whole process, at the end of the day, it will never work unless the administration's value system truly supports this. It will never work. And what I mean by that is we can talk about all the goals, we could put in all the enforcement pieces, but if it's never enforced, it will not work. And years from now, we will be talking about the same thing and the same disparities. What I'm excited about, being the sponsor of this bill, and I basically got this bill about a month ago. So let me tell you a little bit about the process that I wanted to walk through when I got the bill. Number one, because I wasn't intimately involved on the front end. And again, this is data 2 years ago, and people have been working on this for about 2 years. So people have had an opportunity for input on this for over 2 years, notwithstanding whether a bill was set forth or not. But we knew about this data, we knew about the issue, and there were opportunities for people to speak out about it for over 2 years. So what I did is I met with the staff of SLDC. I sat on a phone conference call with the consultant, and I asked questions. One of the questions I asked was, why don't we group everybody into one category of minorities? It would make everybody happy, and that seems to be a tough spot for people to be able to get over. But what's clear is if you have a disparity, you must work on remedies to eradicate the disparity. And if disparity exists between certain groups, we have an obligation to focus on those particular groups to minimize that particular disparity. I'm excited about the staff over at SLDC, just in conversations with them. We have very capable and qualified people that work for the city of St. Louis that are committed to this particular process. But again, it will never work unless the value system of the administration supports it. And that starts with the mayor. Now, here's what I understand about Mayor Cruzen. Mayor Cruzen says she's very committed to diversity. She's very committed to looking at policies through a racial equity lens. One of the things that she did was hire an individual to do just that. Look at how we're doing business, look at different policies through a racial equity lens. So on the surface, we have a system in place to be able to achieve or exceed expectations on minority participation. So I'm excited about that. We need to make sure that every year we're reevaluating what we're doing so that it makes sense for everybody. One of the things I pride myself on is being a very fair person and very practical. So let's walk through a little bit of the board bill. And we'll start on page 3 that talks about management monitoring annual reports. So it's very clear, based on this bill, and if you go to line 20, it talks about presenting an annual report by January the 31st of each year to the mayor and the Board of Aldermen and hold a public forum no later than February the 28th of each year detailing the participation of MWBEs of the city of St. Louis. So we are codifying and we're saying we're not just going to pass this bill, but we want to make sure there's an annual review. And why is that important? That is important because if we are not making the minimum standards, we need to figure out where the shortfalls are and make adjustments. Page 2 basically talks about the delegation of duties. SLDC will be the agency to facilitate all of this, so the burden is on Otis Williams to make sure that we are successful, and he gets paid well to make sure we do that. Right, Otis? Okay. He may not agree with that, but definitions, it goes without saying. So I'll skip to page 6. Notice 6 talks about notice of intent to perform a subcontract. This is a tough area. What contractors have been doing in the past, prime contractors, they would solicit bids. Actually, they will put a placeholder in their bid for a minority firm. And they, for example, they would say, plumbing is going to be $100,000 done by ABC Corporation. And then after they submit their bid, there has been time in the past where they get 72 hours to basically put forth their notice of intent, who the subcontractor is, and they get to shop around. So that $100,000 may not be the amount of money that ABC Corporation needs in order to make sure, as a minority subcontractor, they can meet their payroll and actually make money. So what we're saying is, the notice of intent to perform a subcontract shall mean that the form of the bidder is required to submit to the city at the time of bid opening, signed by each subcontractor listed in the utilization plan. Failure to include a completed notice of intent form signed by each subcontractor is sufficient cause to reject a bid and make it non-responsive. Why is that important? Because it minimizes games that are being played. Now, I will tell you that there are not many minority firms that are willing to come forward and scream and holler and talk about how this is not right and they're being strong-armed and they have to give these lowest bids, because they don't want to be blackballed. They don't want to be ostracized. They want to be able to get work. But they come to the alderman. I've had 2 businesses in my ward that are out of business today because of that gamesmanship. And that's not right, and that's not fair. When you open a bid on bid day, it is what it is, and that's what it should be. Now, that has not been the industry standard, and I get that. And it probably saves the city money if they do that. I get that. But if we are truly embracing minority participation, and we want to upgrade the quality of life of the minority firms in the city of St. Louis, we would do the right thing by them to make sure that whatever bid they submit is the bid that moves forward when the city of St. Louis open those bids on bid opening day. So that's important. I did have conversation about, maybe we should just leave it the way it is. It's been working, and again, it saves money. But at the end of the day, if our value system is appreciating and celebrating diversity, it's just not acceptable. Section 3 talks about policy. I want to point out on page 7, where it talks about policy implementation. It says, the city of St. Louis shall take all necessary reasonable and legal action to alleviate documented disparity and ensure that all businesses are afforded the maximum opportunity for participation in city contracting, which is basically what Mr. Williams talked about. As it talk about goals, line 12, the 2015 disparity study documented a statistical significant disparity in the city of St. Louis award of construction prime contracts to African Americans, Hispanic Americans, and women-owned businesses. That's based on documentation, not just conversation. That is what the study found. Line 21. It talks about there were insignificant contract records available to calculate disparity for professional services contracts, which is kind of a different arena. Professional services, of course, architects, engineers, different professions, not the hardcore masonries and different trades. On page 8, talks about complete prime and all subcontract records will be collected for a 12-month period, and a disparity study update for professional services contracts will be performed within 6 months of the effective date of this ordinance. So we're making it clear, even though there was not enough data, we're not going to settle for that minimum. We're going to work hard to make sure that we achieve some valuable numbers that we can put the test to so that we can do a better job at awarding professional services contracts. And then it says, based on availability, construction project goals shall be 21% for African American, 2% for Hispanic, and 11% for women-owned businesses. So let me pause and talk about that for a little bit, because we've had this executive order of 25 and 5, 25% minority participation, and that meant all minority groups because everybody was lumped into one particular group, and it was 5% women. Breaking it out actually clearly shows where the disparity exists in quantifiable data. What's interesting to me and disappointing, but also rewarding, is we were saying 25%, and African Americans basically thinking, 25% African American businesses, if we can at least get that, something good is going on. But now that's reduced to 21%. But what's rewarding is women went from 5% to 11%. And again, that 25 and 5 was ambiguous. It was just a number somebody came up with 30 years ago that we just kept living with over and over again that we could never truly justify. But now we can justify. But here's the rhetorical question. What did women do that the other categories did not do? And I would submit to you they did the work. They went and did the work to justify that the capacity is there and they're underutilized, not by 5%, but by 11%. Line 13, a bid does not meet subcontract goals or evidence of good faith effort shall be deemed non-responsive and therefore ineligible for award. The M and WBE utilization plan shall be submitted at the time of bid opening or board letting as applicable for project goal compliance, verification, or subcontract certification, and evidence that the subcontractor shall perform a commercially useful function. That we're not just setting up placeholders. We're serious. Page 9 is important. It talks about the MBE, WBE incentive credits. And it talks about 15% incentive credit as part of the total points evaluated on professional service prime contracts shall be applied to African American, Asian, Hispanic American, and women-owned businesses. Why is this important? Because it creates parity. Because if you are a big, I don't want to call a company name, if you're one of the big corporations out there that you see all over the city of St. Louis doing big high-rise and tower-type buildings, you can cash flow a lot better than some of these small minority firms. And so if we are serious about minority participation, then we will support the industry, the small guy. Because America is ran off the backs of small businesses. That is who employ most of the people in America, small businesses, and we need to support that. And that is a bold statement, 15%.
Alderman Boyd?
Yes.
Can you permit me to call Mr. Williams back up just to discuss?
I will pause for the chairman.
I appreciate your willingness to do that. Mr. Williams, so on page 9, which Alderman Boyd was discussing, we've got 2 sections that deal with bid discounts. If you can clarify, so some parts of the bill apply to city contracts, and some parts apply to also construction projects that have incentives attached to them, correct?
Well, essentially, they're broken down into professional service and construction, actual construction. And then we also have supply and services. But I think on page 9, if you want to talk about the 15%.
Hold on, let me just clarify. So page 9 is dealing with
Incentives.
Page 9, particular
it's
paragraph
dealing in
G.
areas where the city issues an RFP to provide either construction services or professional services, correct? And these are bids that,
This specifically, that particular paragraph is talking professional services.
well, G is talking about professional services, but
Right.
F is talking about construction contracts.
Right.
Okay. So this is when the city issues an RFP for $1 million of concrete for
Right.
something, right?
Any entity in the city who has the authority to issue a contract.
Right. Or the city issues an RFP for park master plan. That would be like category G, correct? Okay. Do you know how the 5% and 15% bid discount, how those numbers were arrived at? Was that part of the disparity study?
It was part of the discussion during the public debate, if you will. There were a number of sessions that were there, and so we've had a number of discussions with a number of advocate groups. And so when we essentially looked at how we might be more proactive in trying to get all minority groups, in this case, to include African American, Asian American, Hispanic Americans. So we decided to look at those professional services and contracts under a certain amount to ensure that we could incentivize their participation as well.
Okay. And in
And so
construction,
in this case, on the construction, it was 5%, and on the professional services, it was 15%.
in the construction, it's on contracts of $300,000 or less, but on professional services, there's no.
It isn't, because generally professional service contracts are smaller than those large construction contracts.
Okay. And do we have a policy on that currently?
We do not. This is being introduced.
So this is new. This section is a new, okay. That was helpful. Thank you. Thanks for indulging me there, Alderman Boyd. Please
Absolutely.
continue.
And I'm glad you did, because I skipped over the 5%, so that was talked about. And again, the 5% for construction projects provides parity, which is also in line with, I think, when we do goods, we did an ordinance a few years ago, and with local businesses, you get a 2%, I believe, discount if you're a City of St. Louis business on goods. Okay. Page 11 talks about rules and regulations, and the whole rules and regulations piece is very important. We didn't want to put everything in the ordinance as far as how rules and procedures play themselves out, because it becomes even more restrictive, and it's a lot easier to change a rule or a policy or procedure than it is to change an ordinance. But it just lays out the management, contract rotation program. And for those who don't know much about the contract rotation program, this relates to goods. And it basically talks about the City of St. Louis Supply Division shall establish a contract rotation program for procuring goods and services contracts under $25,000 unit informal solicitation process. That's pretty cool, because it really gives the small businesses an opportunity to do business with the City of St. Louis, such a large corporation. So that's really a step in a good direction. Advertisement is advertisement, how many days it takes. Here's another piece that's important on page 12 as it relates to advertising, because we want to make sure that everything is done decent and in order. So on page 12, line 5, it talks about if advertisements do not meet the MWB requirements, the Office of the Registrar shall reject the advertisement and send it back to the user department and recommend the next available publication date to comply with the 30-day publication procurement. So you can't just, departments can't just on a whim come up with a bid opportunity and, usurp the process. So the registrar is a person that's kind of a gatekeeper to make sure that we publish everything in accordance with our rules. Page 15. Actually, that's in section 5, talks about the staffing requirements. I just want to point out, as far as training, what I appreciate about this bill is we're not just saying we want these goals of 21% for African Americans, 2% for Hispanics, but we're serious about helping the industry increase their capacity. And so the staff at SLDC will be doing trainings. I understand, I know they go out in the community and do trainings for minority corporations and to get them involved in the certification process, to help them with their capacity, introduce them to different financial institutions that can increase their financial capacity. One of the programs out there, Otis may have to help me out. What's the name of the loan program, Otis? Construction loan? Contractors Loan Fund. That was something that was established, was it a couple of years ago? Yes. A couple of years ago, a partnership. I remember, I think Stiefel Nicholas was a lead financial institution on supporting and helping shepherd that into existence. What's good about that, again, it shows the city's commitment. And I'm not sure how many other cities, and I never heard anything in St. Louis County about doing something like that, but that's our way of saying we are here to support you because it's in the city's best interest to help grow small businesses as well at the end of the day. So I just want to point that out, that it's codified that there will be training and there will be support for businesses. And in light of that, because there is something to be said, and I have spoken with the Hispanic community, I have spoken with the Native American community, and I get it. I understand in the Hispanic community, 2% is a minimal. It's such a small number. And it seems like there's a disparity when you look at how many Hispanic companies are out there. However, we could only make this policy based on the data that we have available. But I submit to everybody, again, these are minimum standards and there are opportunities. And if the city is putting the resources behind it, let's use this as an opportunity to build capacity in all of the ethnic groups. Because the city is serious. I know I am serious and committed to this, and I will make sure that the city is standing, walking the walk and talking the talk about this policy, because time is out for just talking about it. So the training is there. The opportunities exist to exceed expectations at the end of the day. There's a computerized system, tracking system that SLDC has they'll be using. They'll be updating it annually. So, for example, if 21% is what it is today for African American companies, if African Americans do the work, maybe 2 years from now, it could be 30 or 35%. That is what I am hopeful of, especially giving them the right tools to work with. Page 19 talks about a sunset provision. Line 6, the city requires a periodic update of the disparity study to evaluate the effectiveness of the program. The program was sunset in 8 years from adoption of the program. The city will perform a disparity study update within 3 years prior to the sunset date. But in the interim, there's data collection going on to make periodic annual updates to what we know. On page 21, it talks about material breach, and this is the penalty phase of the ordinance. And I draw your attention to line 8 of page 21. So it talks about if there's a violation of Ordinance 69-427 as amended, the agency will first cite the violator in writing, giving the violator notice of the violation and a 15-day notice to cure. I will be submitting an amendment to change that to 30 days. Line 10 also suggests 15 days. I'll be asking to amend that to 30 days.
What page, Lord?
I'm on page 21.
21, okay.
21, line 8, line 10. And then it talks about on line 13, remedies of breach. Currently, it says in the event of a violation of Ordinance 69-427 as amended, the agency and the president of the Board of Public Service shall place the developer and the general contractor on a list maintained by the agency, and the developer and general contractor may be barred from participating in public works contracts or TIF projects. I am asking that I will be doing an amendment, asking for your support to change shall to may. Shall makes it mandatory and very absolute, and I think that SLD should have some room to maybe negotiate with some contractors to encourage them to do better without an automatic bar. So, Mr. Chairman, those are the highlights that I wanted to point out in the bill. I'm sure the committee may have more questions outside of what I talked about. And I can wait to offer amendments or?
Ma-
So I would like to let the committee ask questions, both of you and of Mr. Williams, before we get to public testimony.
Okay.
Since we only have 5 members here currently, we can't do any amendments.
No quorum?
Thank you again to those who are here.
We're here.
So I have a couple questions for you and Mr. Williams on some of the.
Mr. Vice Chair, may I add something to his?
Sure, go
comments
ahead.
Very quickly. I think we need to mention was what happened back in 1983 when the city of Richmond, without a study, created a minority set-aside program. The city of Richmond, Virginia was about 50% African American, and they set aside 30% of the dollar value of all municipal contracts for African Americans. In 1989, well, for minorities, in 1989, a majority company, J.A. Croson, sued the city of Richmond, saying that this was unfair to them that this set-aside was made. One lower court ruled in favor of the city of Richmond. It finally went up to the Supreme Court, who said that the city of Richmond didn't do its due diligence to prove that there was, in fact, a disparity. And so then the U.S. Supreme Court said that the city of Richmond had acted illegally and therefore undid their program. So since that date, it became necessary to have a study to prove that you have a disparity. And you can therefore justify that disparity, an exact number, based upon those studies. And that's why it was necessary to have a study first, because the courts have said you cannot go off of anecdotal information. You must go off of clear, measurable data in whatever set-asides that you create. It's cited in the bill, the case between J.A. Croson and Richmond, Virginia. We here in the city of St. Louis, after that, in somewhere around 1990, the city did a study, but also the comptroller's office did a separate study. So we ended up having 2 different bills because they had slightly different numbers. But what cities have done since that date is to introduce legislation after having a study. And the purpose of the legislation is to remedy the disparity. Ultimately, these pieces of legislation are envisioned to become obsolete because the idea is that it would eliminate the problems that are creating this disparity by providing a process by which fairness can be assured. And therefore, the bills are considered the remedy to the disparity. So in the early days, in the early days, some of them would even include insurance programs for minority companies that had problems in getting it, or a pool of money for that. We included that in the bill in 1991, and other types of remedies. Well, the landscape has changed today, so some of those things are not necessary. However, the view is that this bill is to help remedy the problem. But you cannot arbitrarily throw a number in there without having data that is verifiable and can stand up in court. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for that history and context, Alderman Kennedy.
To add on to that, on page 1, line 21 is what he's referring to, which is the J.A. Croson bill. It's one of the whereas clauses that's in this particular bill.
Okay. I'd like to ask a couple questions, and then I will turn it over to the other committee members for more questions or comments. On page 20, so that the first portions of the bill are dealing with city contracts. Page 20, section 9, we get into goals that are for tax increment finance incentivized projects. So there's an apprenticeship goal of 20% apprentices. There are, on tax increment finance projects of $1 million or more, which is all of them basically, there are workforce goals on hours of 25% for minorities, 7% for women, and then there's a city resident goal for workforce hours of 23% in here. Were those goals established in the same Mason-Tillman study, or are these numbers that come from somewhere else?
The baseline was the previous ordinance that was passed by the city. I don't remember the exact ordinance number, and then verified during the study. There was one slight change from the ordinance. I believe it's an increase in the number of city residents. That number went up.
I know we have a policy on those three items right now, so yeah, I'd be curious what the change is from the current policy, the current ordinance that deals with.
The only change on the workforce one is I believe is the one that says city residents, but I will confirm that and get that information for you.
Okay. And then I wanted to ask a question about the remedies for breach section and the liquidated damages section, which are on page 22. So Alderman Boyd did mention that he would have an amendment changing some of the language from shall to may. So particularly on tax increment finance projects, so if we've got a tax increment finance project of, let's say, $10 million, and the developer selects a general contractor, and the general contractor doesn't meet those workforce goals that are listed in this ordinance, is the idea here that general contractor can then be prohibited from bidding on other contracts, on city contracts, number one, and two, that they could be prohibited from performing work on other, like, future tax increment finance projects?
So in the particular paragraph C, the idea...
Well, I'm talking about paragraph B, remedies for breach. The agency and the president of the Board of Public Service shall place the developer and the general contractor on a list maintained by the agency, and the developer and general contractor may be barred from participating in public works contracts or
Right.
tax increment finance projects for a period of 1 year.
Correct. And that was seen as a tool to try and get more participation. But let me preface this response by saying that, you know, we also have in place where a contractor has an opportunity to show that he made a good faith effort, and if he did not get it, and he's able to show that he had a good faith effort, and good faith effort is defined in the definitions earlier here, that he had a good faith effort, then although he may not have gotten to 21, but he got to 17 and was able to show that he did everything possible to get there, then no. But if we felt that that was not a good faith effort, then yes, there was a shortfall of 4%. And so that also speaks to the liquidated damages piece there as well.
Let's stick with paragraph B for a second, though. So I can envision scenarios in which a general contractor is. I mean, I can envision a lot of scenarios. So here's one scenario I'll envision. Let's say we're in a particularly busy construction moment where we have a lot of projects going on. You could envision a situation where 23% of labor hours being performed by city residents is hard to meet if you've got a lot of construction going on, because there's a finite pool of residents of the city who do construction work. You could have a general contractor potentially on 3 or 4 tax increment financing projects at the same time. They may be staggered a little bit, and I can envision a situation where they don't meet that 23% on the first project, and now in this bill they could be prevented from working on those next
No,
two
because
to
in
four
your
projects.
scenario, if in fact we're able to corroborate the fact that all these things are happening and the availability of people and apprentices or whatever section is short, and we can show that the availability is not there, then that essentially is a good faith effort, and we do not penalize for lack of availability. I mean, the example I always like to use is elevators. You know, and generally, if there's a building and it requires an elevator on that particular skill set, just because there are very few minority providers of elevators, it's very difficult as that one skill or one task to fill. We have similar situations on the waterfront, where there's not really a large number of minority contractors who are working in that area. But what we do is we look at in the various skills, the availability is there. We will look at, you know, the workload out there and make a determination. So it's not just willy-nilly that he missed the percentage and then therefore he's barred. There's a lot of due diligence that goes into determining whether or not was it possible to make the goal.
Do you have a sense of who and how many folks will have working on the tracking and working on that type of availability work?
I think the bill, currently we have 4 people in the department. 3 of them are working on compliance, which means that they're the folks that are going out, looking at these projects and documenting whether or not, in fact, what is going on, what is being reported is in fact, I would say 3. Actually, it's 2.5 that are the people that are going out, and so the bill provides for 1 additional person to be added to that, so that we could ensure that we can cover the waterfront.
Okay. And just sticking here with paragraph B, in the event that a general contractor was not meeting these goals and you felt like they were not, the workforce was available and they were not making a good faith effort to meet the goals, the power to bar them from bidding or performing work on tax increment finance projects, on TIF projects, it's with SLDC itself.
With
correct?
SLDC and with Public Works, it's with the
It's
DPS.
Board of Public Service. Who at SLDC would I guess,
Ultimately, it's me.
meet you? Yeah, okay. And then the next paragraph, the liquidated damages paragraph, so just so I understand correctly. We've got, let's say the contract is $1 million, 21% of the contract is supposed to be performed by African-American owned business, so $210,000. In reality, $180,000 of work is performed by an African-American firm, so the liquidated damages would be $30,000 in that scenario?
Yeah, actually, so I look at it from a percentage perspective. So in case where there was a 21% goal, in this case you identified 210,000. If there was a shortfall there and there was not a good faith effort determined, then it would be essentially 4% of the value of in this case, 210,000.
Okay, and that's a penalty that is then paid.
Right.
Who would levy that? The SLDC would levy that penalty,
Correct.
and then
I believe that is the case. Let me make sure.
it says the agency.
Yes.
Wait, hold on. Yeah. And then, if those penalties are paid, that funding would go to Slate.
For workforce, yes.
Okay.
So remember there are two categories. So if there's a failure to meet the workforce goals, then the penalty there would go to Slate. And so, but if it's on the enterprise side of the house, then we would be looking to SLDC itself look to share in that.
Okay. Those are my questions. We can go to our dwindling number of committee members for other questions. If Alderman Kennedy comes back, I'll go to him, but in the meantime, Alderwoman Howard.
Okay. Thank you for coming in today. Is each trade required to meet the goals, or is that a collective number?
It's a collective. It's collective. It's not by trade.
I guess, how was that decided rather than going by trade? A collective number rather than a trade by trade number?
Well, it's an overall. So, like I said, in some cases there are more contractors that are available in certain skill sets or NACS codes, if you will, and fewer in others. But it would be to the general contractors, to discretion to determine how he could best meet the goal.
Would it be more difficult to do trade by trade, or would it?
It would be very difficult to do trade by trade because of the lack of availability in each of the trades.
Okay. So some trades have a plethora of minorities or women or?
Well, there is an overabundance of minority construction companies, for instance, particularly those with carpentry skills, plumbing, electrical. Okay. So, I mean, those are the primary, and heating and the HVAC area as well. So I think that there are sufficient areas within the construction trade where there are sufficient contractors that would be available for the skills.
So it's an average?
It's an number. Essentially,
it's basically an average.
Correct.
Okay. I guess that the reason it isn't trade by trade is just too difficult
and I
to
just
meet it
somebody
that way?
just whispered in my ear from my legal folk that tells me that it's by the courts as well.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I was just wondering. I didn't know.
Okay.
And then I guess the other question I have is why do some sections require African American, Asian, women, Hispanic, and Native Americans they specify, and other sections specify only African Americans and Asians? And I mean, it kind of is inconsistent on these. And
So
that's, I didn't know if that was an error or if that was an intent.
No, if you go back.
Like if, I just here, on page 7, line 14, it cites the study documented, and it awarded construction prime carrots to African American, Hispanic, and women-owned businesses. In addition, then it goes down to talk about African American, Asian American, Hispanic American, and women-owned business were found to have statistical disparity. I don't understand why there's not consistency in mentioning the minority populations.
Okay, so there's a difference between the prime contractors and subcontractors, and also between professional services and construction, and also supply. And so in some of these sections, we are looking, particularly those where we are incentivizing. If you remember, we said that we would incentivize 5%,
Right.
and then also for 15% in other areas.
Right.
But that was also we came up with that incentive to make sure that we could include more minority groups into it. The disparity study itself essentially found only the disparity between a disparity for African American and Hispanic at the levels that were determined. But the incentive is here to try and incentivize the general contractors to include more, but also for the agencies who are contracting to, when they are doing their bid evaluations, to do some discrimination, if you will, in that.
To solicit other minorities
Correct.
to participate, okay. The final question is, how did we arrive at the 20% number derived for apprentice involvement?
That was looking at the availability again. That was determined by, originally that number, the numbers were determined and set in the original
Study?
ordinance, if you will, that was set. And then there was a verification that was to be done by the consultant in this study, and the numbers that you see here is the result of that.
Okay, so he assessed that that is a workable number, getting 20% involvement of
It is
new apprentices, whether they're minority or not.
Correct. And it's a she, by the way.
Well, okay, that person, okay.
Okay.
But they determined that 20% was a achievable goal for
Yes.
apprentices across the board for,
Right.
in every trade. Okay, I was just wondering. Thank you very much, that's all I have.
Okay, is protocol that I now move to President Reed instead of Alderman Kennedy?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. Alderman Kennedy, do you have any other questions or comments?
I do not right now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Alderwoman Navarro.
Thank you. I just started looking at the racial disparity study, which I think is 177 pages, so I haven't quite gotten through it. But it looks like the data in that, the study's from 2015, but the data is through 2012, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so we're looking at data essentially from 2012.
Correct.
Okay. And I know how important the data is so that we get these things right, and that we can meaningfully address disparities. So, I guess, so this would say every 2 years, is that how often we're going to update the study or track?
Well, I think because of the significant discussions that we've had, I think we were indicating that we would do it in 3 years after the passage of this board bill. Yeah, but we will be adding data and updating annually so that we would be prepared for that study when performed.
And do we currently have the tools to be able to collect the data, or what needs to happen so that we can make sure, because the data is so important, and in terms of being able to make sure that we're counting everyone and all of these businesses, because the narrative is often different than the statistics.
So shortly after we started the disparity study and found the results, we solicited to include what we call a GPTS, which is a tracking system. It's actually Trinal is the firm that we are using. And essentially all of the contracts all of the projects at least on the development side. And I also know that the folks at the Board of Public Services also using it for all of their contracts, and the folks at the airport have a tracking system as well. And so what we do is cause the contractors to input their data into that system, and so it is now providing us with better data to be able to make decisions from.
Okay. I don't have any other questions right now. Thank you.
Alderwoman Davis, who's not a member of the committee, is here. I think she has a question or two.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to, I was listening to you. You said you had some amendments that were coming forward. I do know that in the last 18 months, there were a couple of things that were talked about, and I wasn't sure if one was mentioned about liquidating damages. Is that still the same as it was 18 months ago?
I don't know what that discussion was 18 months ago.
In the original bill, it had a,
Are you speaking to the rules that we currently have?
yes, sir.
Okay. Essentially, they are the same. Well, you know, it is what we're proposing now. We are, you know, in fining or at least causing firms to pay is different than what we had then. So let me get some help here with.
Yeah.
There's actually a liquidated damage clause in both, I'm sorry, Leslie Mitchell Yancey with St. Louis Development Corporation General Counsel.
Okay.
In
so-
response to your question, Alderwoman, there are liquidated damage clauses in this board bill for both MWBE compliance and for workforce compliance.
Okay.
But is that
And so,
different from?
And it is different from the mayor's executive order.
okay, so one of the things that I think we had the main concern about was we needed to have a little bit clearer definition of what that would be, like a certain percentage of the contract and/or when you will make those decisions. Do you do it at the first sign-off before turnkey of a project, or it just needs to be a little clear?
There is a retention of funds at the beginning of the contract to
Right.
cover this.
Right.
And it would not be assessed until that contract is complete. And it's time to either turn over that retainage or keep it. So that's when the project goals would be looked at and assessed in final.
Okay.
And one of the reasons it's that way is because we have contractors who have shown that over time, even if they start a little short, that they're able to provide additional participation as we go along. So we measure at the end of the project.
Well, I do know that some people had some concerns about that early on. I had stepped away from this particular bill for a moment, and in my last year of conversations with Associated General Contractors and small business owners, that was one of their concerns in the process and when it would take place. And so I just wanted to make sure we were all on the same track.
And let me say this, Alderwoman, because I did get the same concern, but the board bill does not specify exactly. It says a percentage, and the rules would dictate what that percentage is.
So we're going to clarify that when
In
we
the
put our
rules.
rules and
That's
regulations
correct.
together.
That's correct.
That is a good answer. Okay, that makes me feel better. So we can still have conversations on this, and we will come up with that as part of process and procedure
Yes.
with the rules.
Yes.
Okay, that makes me feel better on that one. My last question, very quickly, is on where we talked about the 72 hours to, after bidding, bid certificate.
Yes, I forget the page.
I was trying to find it, and I couldn't find it.
That is on page 6, line 4, notice of intent to perform a subcontract.
Yeah, I think that was another one of those situations where I think we probably can put that in our rules and regulations, allowing 72 hours.
But I think the point
Rather
that
have
was
you.
being made is that we didn't want to allow 72 hours.
You don't want to,
Right,
but people are asking for it.
yes.
And that's status, let me speak to that. And that's part of the status quo, and that's part of the breakdown in the system, because I've got a lot of complaints from minority firms that there was a placeholder there for a certain amount, and the expectation when the prime gets the bid is that they have to do it for that amount. And that's when you'll find out that who they intended to use for plumbing, for example, they didn't end up using because that person would not meet that particular dollar value.
Well, one of the things I'm going to recommend, because, you know, we suffered that in a dramatic way at the Board of Education before we changed all the policies and set up a lot of structure. That young man right there was there when all that was happening, Eddie Hassan. So one of the things that we can do when we look at your rules and regulations is to put some very strong language there on how we're going to move forward and the time frame, because I don't want to see us get into those situations where we have to go back and try to remedy something that shouldn't have never happened in the first place. I've been down that road where somebody said they were going to have 15% participation or whatever, and they end up having 2 or none, because those people put out they don't give them any work to do. They use them to get the bid, and then they don't get any work.
Exactly.
So I can ask you to come up with something in the rules and regulations to cover that, if you don't mind.
Yeah. And let's be clear also, the contract, the prime contract has 30 days, basically, in order to get their stuff together. But if they
Right.
wait to the last minute, and so here's the scenario. So the general contractor has 30 days, and then he gives a subcontractor 5 days to come up with a bid. Well, these small contractors, they have a lot of work going on. They don't have a staff like
No.
the big guys do. And so they end up being put in as a placeholder. And so ABC Plumbing Corporation, that was what the intent said when everything was submitted, but then they end up using XYZ Corporation because that plumber said, I'm not doing it for that amount. And so we just want to cure that, because that is a real problem.
That's a serious problem. So I think that everybody's going to have to give a little bit on this, because it's a critical part in building capacity as well. And some of the things that we have put in place, and I would suggest, and I think I've suggested this before, and you may have already done it, is look at some of the things that were put in place at the Board of Education, because we were able to turn that system around where, and on a good year, there would be 5 or 6% participation. And on most projects now, they average over 35%, because the people are here, they can do the work, and we want to make sure everybody gets their fair share. And I just, very quickly, Chairman, I will end with disparity studies. I'm so happy that they mandated that we do them, because that way you have facts to work with. And that will take us a long way in the future. And it might be helpful if we provided a seminar so that people can see how that data was gathered, because even for me, when they presented it to us, all the different things that they looked at to come up with those analyses. And so when you look at your census, the number of building permits were pulled, by who, dollar amounts, I mean, it covers the whole gambit. And so it's very factual information. And hopefully we will also have that opportunity for people to understand how that data was gathered. Thank you very much, sir.
Okay, I thought of 2 quick questions I still have, and then we're going to take testimony from the
Mr.
public.
Chairman, if you don't mind, because we do have the president here, and he would help constitute a quorum, I would like to add the amendments to the bill at this time, if that's okay.
Give me a second. otherwise I'm going to lose my train of thought.
Okay.
But I would welcome you to distribute the amendments now so we can, okay. Okay. So the, you have them?
Everybody else should have one.
Oh, everybody has them with me. I'm usually the last to know things. Oh, there they are. Okay, thank you. Okay, so I think Alderwoman Navarro asked a version of this question, and maybe I didn't hear correctly. But there's two different numbers referenced in this bill on when the disparity study is updated. So on page 10, line 3, section, I think your, Alderman Boyd, yours might be numbered a little differently than ours, actually, but.
There's as amended, and then there's the original.
Oh. I'm looking at the original bill.
The original?
Well, okay, so here's the sentence. Notwithstanding any other provision of this ordinance, the 2015 disparity study will be updated 2 years from the effective date of this ordinance. And then
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, what page is that again in line?
it's page, on the bill I'm looking at, it's page 10, line 3, section H,
Line 3.
or paragraph H.
Is it on you?
It's right before the training section.
Yep, directly above training.
Let me get it together. It's right here. Let me get it together.
Okay, so there's that. And then on page 19, the sunset provision says the city will require a periodic update of the disparity study to evaluate the effectiveness of this program. Program sunsets in 8 years. The city will perform a disparity update, study update within 3 years prior to the sunset date. So that's, if you do the math, that's 5 years from now. So we've got contradictory schedule of when we update the disparity study within the bill.
We can do it in 2 years.
Hmm?
We're prepared to do it in 2 years.
Okay, well, I think we should sort it out in the bill, so we don't have two different timelines. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, so either page 19 will have to be amended to say what is on page 10 or vice versa.
Well, I'm suggesting that you eliminate the sentence, the last sentence on page 19, beginning on line 8, that the city will perform within 3 years, and go to page 21, to line 21 on page 9, that we will do an update in 2 years.
Okay. Then my last question, or clarification, if we go back to page 21, or page 20 or 21 on workforce participation. So let's go to labor hours. So 25% of labor hours are to be performed by minorities. We sort of have different definitions of minorities within the bill, because when we're talking about contracts, we're talking about African-American owned firms.
In the case of, the definition of minorities in this case is all minorities.
All non-white
Yes.
groups, okay.
And women.
Well, women have a separate 7%. Okay, okay, that works. That was my last question. All right, I'm going to allow Alderman Boyd to present the 3 amendments he has distributed here. Before we do this, why are your and my bills numbered differently? I'm a little bit confused by that.
Explain it again, I don't know.
The bill as amended.
270.
Okay. The as amended, okay. Okay. Well, we're about to amend it, so now I have both in front of me. All right. Alderman Boyd has distributed 3 amendments. I believe that I am allowed, with my discretion, to let you talk about all of these 3, and we can make a motion to adopt all 3 of them at once.
Sure, and Mr. Chairman, I want to point out, going back to your question about the disparity study, I consulted with Leslie, the attorney, and I want to go back to page 19, the sunset provision, where the last sentence says the city will perform a disparity study update within 3 years prior to the sunset. That should actually say the city will perform a disparity study within 3 years, which is a comprehensive study and not just an update. And so, without having a written amendment, I would probably want to add amendment number 4, if that's okay.
Can
We're just
we-
going to strike that out.
Since this is an important point, can we get that in writing? And since we're also looking at,
Sure. Okay. Can we get that in writing, Mr. Clerk? So, amendment number 1 to Board Bill 270, basically on line 21, page 5, we're going to strike out 15 days and replace it with 30 days. Simple change of dates. Amendment number 2 to Board Bill 270, page 21, line 7, does the same thing, strike out 15 days and replace it with 30 days. Amendment number 3, page 21, line 13, we will strike out shall and insert
All
may.
right. Okay, so we have, I'm sorry to interrupt you. So the amendments, as they're written in front of me, do not correspond to Board Bill 270. So I'm going to, here's my suggestion. We take public comment
Okay.
now, and that will give, if we want to fix these amendments so the line numbers are correct, so we know what we're amending, we can do that during the time where we're having some public testimony.
Will do.
Okay. Thank you, Alderman Boyd. Going to take public comment now. We have several people signed up, pro and con. It's not clear to me exactly from the sign up. Some of them look like they are on both sides a little bit. So on the listed first on the pro side is Keith Savage. Is that correct? That is correct. Okay. Mr. Savage, you're welcome to come up. Please introduce yourself, and you're welcome to discuss Board Bill 270. Thank you.
Thank you for accepting me today to speak. My name is Keith Savage. I own a firm, Savage Solutions Group. I was based in St. Louis, but I was removed to work for Governor Jay Nixon on disparity in the state of Missouri. I'm not here to talk about what's wrong with this bill. I'm here to show you value that I've noticed that no one else has brought to your attention. In doing so, I want to share with you, I have 10 business owners. Did I do that?
The microphone's a little sensitive.
Okay, I have 10 business owners that live outside of St. Louis that are willing to relocate here and move into North St. Louis. And we are all 2+ years in business with positive financials and credits. Also have an insurance company that's already moved here from Chicago that is working with SLDC to provide a bonding program for minority-owned businesses with bad credit, gives them access to capital, and sets them up with a back office. So here are the benefits of this bill. One, we will put our business here, pay tax revenues, including double user's tax, like I pay as well, and we will make jobs in the low-income community. What that does for this city is it reduces crime because people will be too tired to do crazy things at night because they'll need to go home and go to bed. The other thing is we're putting a skilled workforce center. So when you talk about workforce, it will be at 3100 North Grand, and the trades that are participating, which we've been working on this with Alderman Kennedy as well, we introduced before the Thanksgiving holiday, is the Painters Union, Council 58, wallpaper hangers, and the parking lot signage Teamsters, union leaders as well. We have 50 people that have already signed up to take the 10-week training course. And I've secured funding to make sure they get paid while they go through the training of 10 weeks. And when they graduate, us 10 business owners will find them jobs. And they will work in the community and spend their money in the community. When we get past that phase, we will then begin building those communities that need help, like Jeffrey Barrage Ward, the 3rd Ward, the 8th Ward, and Alderman Tyus Ward as well. And we'll go anywhere where we need to be. And we will bring leadership, and we will bring capital. But here's the key to this. If we don't have this bill, we're not at a fair level. I've been around here for 17 years as a business owner. It's not fair. That's why I didn't mind leaving. We are dying on the vine right now with $10 billion plus in construction. We're not at the table to eat. I know that's not city projects, but with the public and private partnership, the Chamber of Commerce has come on board and stepped up to the plate and taken over the Minority Business Council, and we are now reworking it so that we can make sure that these individuals that come and bid on the city projects will be more than adequately qualified. We're not looking for a handout. We want to be at the starting line with everyone else. Let me share with you that even on non-city projects, we never get paid on time. So anyone who complains to you about, oh, another minority this and another minority that, hey, we're good at what we do, and we're proud of it. But there's very few of us. And this system that has been going on for years has put many of us out of business because we get paid 120, 160 days, and the prime and the sub already got paid. If you give us the opportunity, we will lead this city where we used to be number 17 in the Ebony magazine, because when I used to do some advocacy for Mayor Slay, when Ebony rated us, we were number 17 in America. We're not even on the chart now. So look, this isn't rocket science. We pay taxes, we vote, we'll do whatever it takes to make this city, as the theme goes now, great again. Give us a shot.
Oh, please.
So no matter, hey, he said it, I didn't, right? But look, this isn't about black, Hispanic, this is about a fair shot. If you want to reduce crime, if you want to get kids off the street, we'll help you. We're not asking you for any money. We're asking you to give us a shot. Other cities do it, like in LA and everywhere else. Dallas, Ohio. I travel the country learning best practices, and I share them with Otis and his staff. If you want to see how it works, I invite you to go to the Faultless Laundry, the new one. I was responsible for bringing in minority participation on that job. We're at 26.5% minority, 3.5% on women. And here's the kicker. We use minority and women from all over the region. And that's a big spend. And you know where that money's going? To people who want to work. So for anyone who's bold enough to stand up here and say, to tell you what's wrong with this bill, that's what's right with this bill. Think about that. At a time when our revenues are weak, when we can give money to the Blues and we can give money to everyone else, which is great because I love hockey too, and I do go, believe it or not. Give us a shot. That's all we're asking. You're going to get a return on investment in multiple ways. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Savage. If you can, are there any questions for Mr. Savage from the committee?
I'd just like to thank him for his testimony.
Okay. Next on the list is Mr. Bill Mueller.
Thank you, Chairman Ogilvy and the committee for allowing us to present. My name is Bill Miller, and I'm one of the managers at TSI Global, which is a Native American-owned contracting firm. We're an electrical contractor and low-voltage integrator, member of the IBEW union, and so forth. Obviously, there's a tremendous amount of good about this bill, but obviously I'm disappointed in the single most fact that the Native Americans are excluded based upon the findings of the disparity study. And it amazes me how every public official that gets up on a podium talks about the need for diversity and inclusion and the need to increase those two elements, both for the good of the community as well as economic development. But yet, we have legislation that, again, is based upon a study that really limits the individual minorities. If they're small, they don't get to participate in the program. So rather than promoting inclusion and diversity, I think this program in this Bill 270 almost exclude growing the diversity. And I also realize that what I just said there is kind of a policy statement and has really nothing to do with legislation. And I'll acknowledge that and I'll move on and talk specifically about Bill 270 and the legislation. I understand the Supreme Court, Crossan versus the City of Richmond. I've read it well. I've talked to many people and consultants regarding it. And I do understand that the primary mission, as Alderman Kennedy pointed out, is to correct and remediate past discrimination. I get that. I understand the data. And I support the premise of the study in general. However, what I want to do is challenge the data. It was brought up earlier about the age of the data. The study examined data from 2007 to 2012. At that time, the study was completed and presented in a public hearing format in the spring of 15. So when the data was presented, it was already anywhere from 3 to 8 years old. Now we're standing here the spring of 18, another 3 years has gone by. And I'm not sure why it's taken 3 years to get to the point we're at today, but nevertheless, here's where we stand. So what that means today is that data is anywhere from 6 to 11 years old for an average of 9.5 years old. From our perspective, it's irresponsible to pass this kind of legislation that has such a serious impact on the community based on 9.5-year-old data. So what I'd like to do is to talk a little bit about the data from the study, because that's what the legislation is based upon. The Native American, and I'm going to limit my comments to the subcontracting piece of the study and therefore the bill, because it is segmented out, and that's the space that the TSI plays in as a subcontractor. So it was determined at the time of the study that the Native Americans collectively, not just TSI, but collectively, had a capacity of $576,000. We actually received one contract for the value of $19,000. Clearly a disparity in terms of capacity and actual contracts. That's what the studies are all based upon. However, that being so small, it only represented less than 0.5% of capacity in the total contracting dollars for subcontracting, which was $117 million at the time of the study. Therefore, we were deemed significantly insignificant, or statistically insignificant. I get it from a statistic perspective, but we're real people, we're real companies, and yeah, we're small, and we're small at the time, and I'm talking about the Native American community at large. However, at the time of the study, TSI was not a certified MBE company. We were acquired by a Native American, and we became a certified MBE contract in the year 2014. So our data and our capacity as TSI was not recognized at the time of the study. I get that. The study was done in 2013. However, today, our company's revenues average between $35 and $40 million a year. We have a bonding capacity of $20 million. And a bonding capacity is the best indication of capacity in a construction arena. So if you take a look at the capacity of just simply TSI, not including the other Native American companies, we clearly have a significantly larger capacity than what was recorded at the time of the study. So it is just, if you take a look at $20 million of capacity against a $117 million contracting amount, we have significant capacity to perform work. So what I'm asking is that we use more current data that's available. And, we've spent the last 3 years since the first hearing on the Mason-Tillman study, we've spent the last 3 years lobbying for someone to examine the data and to look at it and to include us. And we haven't prevailed in any of that, efforts. I want to bring up two other things before I close. One is the provision for the 5% bid discount. It seems to me that the bill, as written, has a lot of teeth in it, and that's the whole intent of it, and I applaud that. That the games and the shams will go away with this bill's enforcement. But I also maintain that if you look at a 5% bid discount in the construction business, if we're not part of this program, I'm going to have to compete with African-American, Hispanic, and women-owned businesses that are going to have a 5% advantage over me in terms of pricing. That's about the profit margin in subcontracting business. So if I want to continue to pursue city contracts, I'm really going to have to bid it at cost to be competitive. And in the subcontracting world, if you take a look at subcontracting, the biggest cost is labor. Everybody knows St. Louis is a pretty strong union town. Cost of labor to me is exactly the same as a bigger company than me or a smaller company than me. It makes up the bulk of the cost of our bids. So I think that there's enough starch, if you will, in the enforcement. Number one, the goals are set, and number two, there's remedies if the goals aren't met. Therefore, I think that alone ensures that the disparity that needs to be corrected will be corrected, and I maintain there's not a need for a 5% bid discount. Second point I want to bring up, as far as a question and issue, is the extension to TIF financing projects. I was told during multiple hearings in the 15-16 timeframe that absolutely this program intent will be extended to private projects that have a TIF component to them. And if you take a look at that, again, I'm referring subcontracting, the study only examined the city proper's spend on subcontracting, which was $117 million. All of the capacity data, and thus the goals that were set in this program based upon the disparity between capacity and total contracting dollars, were based on the $117 million. If you extend this program to include private enterprise and private construction that has a TIF spending component to it, that number will, I don't know what that number will be, but it will be substantially larger than $117 million. So then, once that occurs, all of a sudden, the capacity of all of the minorities in the study will no longer be relevant. If you're not comparing capacity to 117 million city business, you're comparing it to, let's just say, $500 million worth of construction spend. There's no way that the minority community at large can meet 25% goals on a much larger number than that. So, you know, that is clearly an issue, and that Croson is incredibly clear on the fact that a city cannot implement goals that cannot be met by substantiated capacity. If there's no capacity, there can't be a goal. They have to be in sync. And once you enter into TIF financing projects, all the numbers that are in the Mason-Tillman study today are irrelevant. So I think that's a very important point I'd like the committee to consider. Sort of in closing, we've spent the last 3 years attempting through various meetings with everybody that will listen to us to try to go with a combined MBE goal like the state of Missouri does, like the current executive order does. We've successfully participated in this program for the last 4 years under the executive order, under combined MBE goals. I've met with Alderman Boyd, I've talked to various people, and I do understand the challenges of having a combined goal. So I'm not asking any longer to combine those goals because I understand the issues. What I am asking is that the committee clearly take into account the data that's available today as opposed to between 6 and 12 years ago to submit legislation. And in that, I have a solution, and I'm basically respectively requesting that the bill be amended in the goal section to include Native American businesses at a 2% gold participation level. And that in no way diminishes any of the goals that are already in the study and already in the bill. It wouldn't change any of that. It would just simply allow us to participate at a very, very conservative level relative to our proven capacity. And that, because it's quite simple. If the study took place in 2014, the Native Americans would be statistically significant. So with that, I'd like to close and thank the committee and answer any questions that you might have.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Mueller. Are there questions for Mr. Mueller from this side of the table? Alderman Kennedy?
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. So the information that you provided came from where?
Which one?
About the Native American numbers?
It came from the study in table 7.02.
No, I mean the new information.
Oh,
that
the
you
new
provided.
information?
Right.
Well, it comes from two things. One, and I've prepared a packet that I want to leave for all the committee members that has all the data in it. Our revenues, we're not a public company, but I would be happy to publish, or not publish, but provide to the committee our revenues. And I've also included our bonding letter that states that we have a bonding capacity of $20 million.
So the information that you have says where you got the data from?
I've got the actual letter that states that we have that bonding capacity.
I mean the data in terms of the number of Native American companies and their capacity here.
I didn't address the number of companies. I'll be honest with you, I don't know how many Native American companies there are. I'm just stating that my company alone, as a Native American company, has a bonding capacity of 20 million and an actual revenue capacity. I could do much more than that if it wasn't required for bonding. We do that much business a year.
I think I may not be explaining myself well.
Okay.
You mentioned some data about the capacity of Native American companies, that the information that was used for this bill was outdated. I'm asking, do you have the source material where we can find this new information that you're saying that the study could be based upon?
I can provide that to you. I mean,
If you would,
yeah, okay.
if you would do so. And then are there any Native American companies whose offices are in the city of St. Louis presently?
That I'm not aware of. I don't know that there is or isn't.
Okay. But your office is not
We are not. We do work in the city, but we're located in St. Charles.
in St. Charles?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. If I can maybe clarify, maybe I'm wrong, but I think the question is TSI was not certified as an MBE
Right.
during the study period, but was certified as an MBE in 2014.
2014.
After the data was collected, which is maybe partially the answer to your question.
No, I was trying to get at the new information that he was talking about and where he got it from.
Okay.
I'm basically taking from our company alone. I mean, I'm stating that,
Okay.
that since we were certified in 2014, our capacity has never been part of the study or analysis, and our capacity alone, much less whatever Native American other companies have grown since the data 6 to 11 years ago, we alone have that capacity to do $20 million. And the study only credits us $567,000 of capacity, and that's from the study.
All right, thank you, Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you.
President Reed, do you have any questions?
No,
Okay. Alderman Boyd, any questions for?
No, no questions.
Alderwoman Navarro, any questions for Mr. Mueller? No. Okay, thank you for your testimony,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Mueller. Next up on the pro side is Eddie Hassan. Is he here? All right. Thank you, Mr. Hassan. Please introduce yourself and let us know
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
who you're
and,
with, so to speak.
Eddie Hassan, past president of MoCan Contractors Association, and I want to thank the aldermen who've done due diligence on putting this board bill together. I'm most certainly happy and ecstatic to be able to see it coming together after so many years of just the mayor's executive order. And I think it's been some conversation about that executive order from year to year to year. But I can remember going back when we first got this executive order established under Mayor Shamel, that it was some conversations about the possibility of being able to get a board bill passed, and at that particular time, the votes wasn't there to get it passed. And because of his commitment and because the fact that he had entered into the city consent decree in federal court that have mandated the fact that the city had discriminated and past practices in bidding awards, that he wanted to implement a program that would remedy that past discrimination. So he entered into an executive order. And since that time, it's been several attempts to be able to get legislation passed. And I'm just thankful and happy that I'm beginning to see the possibility today of this legislation being passed. One thing I'd like to be able to say in the process of this taking place is that management, monitoring, and annual reports is most certainly critical. And what I would like to see is that we fund that branch of this program to manage this and to monitor programs so we can make sure that it's achieving what it is that we want to achieve in terms of helping to establish and build minority businesses, because I think that's going to be critical for the city, critical for our region, and critical, I think, that Keith talked about being able to help reduce crime in our communities by creating jobs. So that's going to really be critical, and I'm most certainly hopeful that that's the case. And based on the availability and the construction and the goal of 21%, this is a goal. If you remember, it was a minority goal initially of 25% that included all minorities, and then we had a goal that included women. So what happened is that you see the goal for women increases, but also the goal for African Americans have increased, because now we can begin to see some growth in those areas, African American businesses as well as female businesses. So these numbers represent the fact that it is working, okay? So if you look at 21%, some people might say, well, it used to be 25, but 25 was a combined goal, okay? Now it's a separated goal because of the disparity study. And this is not the first disparity study that we've had. We've had disparity studies before over the years. I think we've had maybe about, what, three? At least three disparity studies. So I'm glad to see that this disparity study is working, even though it might be a little outdated. Okay, the process of this is really catching up and begin to be able to tell us the story that we need to have told in terms of us building those businesses. And the other thing that I think I would most certainly wish that the Alderwoman was here, because she mentioned a trade-by-trade goal. This is something when we talk about now, when we really get down to, you know, where the rubber meets the road and where the boots are on the ground, we're talking about now workers in the areas. And we most certainly want to be able to see apprentices on the projects. We want to be able to see more African American and women on these projects. But most certainly, we want to be able to see it across all the trade goals. Because what have happened in the past is that we've had complaints from the carpenters, we had complaints from the laborers that they carry the biggest bulk of the participation. And what we like to be able to see is that a little bit more attention is placed on the various different trades, so we can increase the number of African Americans and women in the various different trades, such as the electrical trades, such as the mechanical trades, such as the plumbing trades. We want to be able to see all of those skilled trades begin to increase in numbers. So we've been working with those trade organizations, and all of them at this stage of the game have opened up the doors and said that, yeah, we want to be able to recruit more African Americans, more minorities. But what I'm saying to you in this particular process, when we're talking about apprentices on the job, and when we're talking about African Americans on the job, and we're talking about females on the job, we want that to go back now to that monitoring process to make sure that that is taking place. Because the more people we're able to get on these jobs, that means the less people we got that's out in the neighborhood committing crimes. Right now, we have a pre-apprenticeship program going. We have about 25 people in that program started out. And what we do is we prepare these individuals to be able to go into these trades. So we are excited about the opportunity, and we're excited about all the work that's taking place or that begin to take place in the city of St. Louis. So these individuals can get an opportunity to be able to build themselves, build their families, help build their communities, okay, and become a productive citizen in the area. We think that these goals for workforce, along with the goals for inclusion, will most certainly lend itself to making that happen. And I think that as time go on, we're going to be able to look back and be able to pat ourselves on the back as a result of this legislation being passed and us implementing that in a forceful and a committed kind of way. And I think Alderwoman Davis mentioned to you one thing about we was able to address this with the Board of Education. You were on the Board of Education back in the day, and we were able to address that, okay, in the workforce as well as with participation. But we had put some teeth in the program, and we put money in the program to make sure that we was able to monitor that program and make sure that it delivered what it was supposed to deliver. And what happened was that it was only happened twice. And what happened was that when general contractors came to the table and they did not have that, and they committed to being able to do that and wasn't able to back that up, they rejected those bids and they rebidded those projects. So all we have to do on certain occasions is not to accept those bids, reject those bids, and put the job back out to let them know we mean business about this legislation. Thank you all so much for your hard work, and we're looking forward to being able to get this passed. Thank you. Any questions?
Are there any questions for Mr. Hassan, Alderman?
If I may,
Kennedy? Yeah.
Mr. Vice Chair, I'd like to thank you for your comments and also giving some of the historical perspective, because you were there at the time when these were first introduced and when those first studies came out.
Yes, sir.
President Reed?
Yeah, I just want to add to that and just tell you, thank you for your comments. Thank you for all the hard work you've done in this field for all the years you've done it in. And it has made a difference, so I appreciate it.
Fantastic.
And I do have one other comment to make. I just want to, and this is to, what's his name, Bill? Bill. You know, I understand your concern about adding the 2% in, right? And I just want to make sure it's clarified. The reason the alderman from the 18th was asking you about a study is for us to amend something like that and have it be able to withstand a court challenge. We actually need a authorized study behind it. We just can't throw it in there. So because we have to be able to show that there is true capacity to meet it. Although now there may be capacity, and I'm assuming that that your one company would make up that 2%. But if it's less than 2%, it kind of really messes up this whole thing. The other provision that's in the bill, there will be regular updates being made, right? So this isn't the last time we will see this, right? I think that this needs to be an evolving process. And the biggest challenge the city has had is not having a regular process in place where we order studies and have those studies done on a regular basis and then have some action being taken on those studies. It took years for us to even push the last administration to the point where we can actually get a study issued, and that was largely driven by the alderman from the 18th and folks like Hassan and other people in getting that done, and they finally were able to get it done. So I'd say, I really appreciate your testimony, if it's possible to do a study early, and I think that's part of what the chairman was talking about, the process for updating the report. We'll have an opportunity to come back and amend it moving forward. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, and I respect your position. The only comment I'd make is that we've been trying for 3 years to get somebody to look at the data and update it, and they haven't done it. And I hate to think that we're going to have to wait until the next study is updated, and that's my comment. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
Alderwoman, you wasn't in the room, but most certainly want to thank you for the comment and asking that question about trade by trade. This is something we've been trying to get done for quite a while, and we most certainly want to see more African Americans and women across the board, not just in carpentry, not just in painting, not just in labor, but across the board in all those trades. So most certainly would like for you to be able to push that to make sure you begin to get that report on trade by trade so we can hold all their feet to the fire, okay, along that line.
And part of the problem is we have across the board in all levels, a problem recruiting young people into the trades anymore.
Well, I can guarantee you one thing.
That's why I worry about the 20%.
We'll help them recruit. We're recruiting right now all the time. We're working with Slate, and we're doing this recruiting. We got classes going on right now, and what we're doing is preparing these individuals that can pass the drug test, can pass the math test, and what we're doing, we're carrying them to the various different apprenticeship programs, okay, so they can select from individuals. They don't have to go out now to find them. They don't have to worry about whether or not they can pass the drug test, okay? So we're preparing them to be able to do just that. So
Okay.
we can want to help them to be able to meet those numbers.
That's comforting to know, because I think that, as one of our speakers stated, that if we provide jobs for these young people, we may be addressing another critical problem in our city.
Absolutely, and that's most certainly what we think in the same way.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Alderwoman Navarro, did you have any questions? Okay, next on the list is Chief Langford.
Aya, Akema Echapungwe, Alwainswani, Nila Miyamya. I'm Chief Langford of the Miami Tribe, and I'm very appreciative of this opportunity to speak before this Board of Aldermen and Alderwomen today on this very important issue. I'm going to skip part of what I have written down because Bill's already went over it twice. You know, roughly we have spent 3 years trying to get someone to acknowledge us. But the things that I would like to ask is if it sounds like if this does go forward and you do pass it, I beseech you not to leave us out. 2 years is a very long time for us to wait for a study. You basically build a wall around St. Louis for Native American people if you implement this and leave us out. We're looking to make another acquisition here in St. Louis to support TSI. I'm not going to go down that road if you're going to build a wall around St. Louis and say Native Americans, you're out. I beseech you not to do this without giving us, give us 0.5. I mean, we can prove 2, just us alone. Give us 0.5. You can defend that in court. We're here. We're standing in front of you today. We can show our capacity. We can show what we do. We can prove those. Those are proven things that can hold up in a court case. And that's why we say 2%, we're there. Whatever we can prove, that's all we can ask for. But give us a chance to prove it to you before you pass this and leave us out. You know, it's very important, and not just to my tribe and my members, because the funds that we generate from this endeavor go to support our people. I'm an elected official, just as you are, I'm assuming. So, you know, these things are very important, and there are 560 some odd nations out here in the U.S. I don't know how many members from those tribes live here in St. Louis. You know, I know we do have some. I think I can't remember what the last count was, but I just beseech you, don't build this wall with this for 2 years. It's a disparity study. You did the study for a reason. You wanted to know who's not getting included. And we're here begging, saying, don't leave us out. And so, again, I don't even want to say this, but I do have to plant the seed is we don't want to go a legal road. That's why we're begging. Just don't leave us out. We don't want to have to do a challenge. Because I'm not threatening them. I'm just saying, you know, we've invested heavily in this company, in the purchase. And like I said, we're looking to do another one. You know, and we don't want to fight here. We just give us a little piece. That's all we're asking for. If you pass this bill, just don't leave us out. Thank you very much.
Okay, sit tight for a second. Alderman Kennedy, any questions?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I didn't catch your title. You are
Chief of the Miami Tribe.
of which one?
Chief of the Miami Tribe of Oklahoma.
Miami.
Yeah.
In
I said
Oklahoma.
it in the language, yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. In Oklahoma.
Yes. That's where, that's our seat of government.
Right.
But we have members all over. Fort Wayne,
Okay.
we are diverse because we were removed twice, forcibly
Right.
removed.
Right.
We were removed from Fort Wayne roughly to just south of Kansas City, and then we were again removed. Oh, we got a better place for you. Go down here to Oklahoma. And so we have to purchase businesses outside of our area because we're about 15 miles from the number 3 size Superfund site in the U.S. We can't do business like can be done in a large metropolitan city, so we have businesses all over the U.S.
And
So-
you are part of the, was it TC?
PSI. We
You're
are the majority owner. The tribe is the
And
majority.
and that company grosses how much in a year? grosses 40 million
$40 million
last year, 40 million, okay.
35 the year before.
And you were just recently certified as a,
No, 2014 by the Airport Authority and 2016 by the state of Missouri.
okay.
So we participated in the executive.
I have to stop you, you're not supposed to shout across.
If you,
Yes, Mr.
Let,
Vice
just let me know who you're asking the
I
questions.
was
of,
asking
and if-
him, actually.
Well, he answers, he can answer that question
he
better
was
than I can.
enthusiastically answering. And so then so it seems like you have two suggestions. One is you're saying put 0.5% in the bill.
Minimum.
Minimum,
I mean,
right.
if you can't go the 2 that we represent, we can do. If you can't go the 2%, I'm just begging you not to leave us out of
Right,
the
right.
way we are, because we're out right now.
But you do recognize the law, the case, the law case, the court case that
I
says you have to
recognize
have
that,
data. And so if the city doesn't have the data,
You have it. It's
well,
state-
that's what I was trying to get at when I asked.
But we're in front of you. You don't need a study. All you need is
No,
our
we do.
accounting
The
record.
city
You need-
does.
no,
The
you
city
have our-
does.
you-
No,
if you
no.
have our accounting record,
The-
that's a study that this city
No,
just did.
the court case clearly states you have to have verifiable data. There is certainly the will here to include every minority that possibly could at the highest number. That's not the question. The question is this thing, could it stand up to a court case? Because in St. Louis, it's bound to happen. And it's because of, and let's be clear, the racism in this city, it is bound to happen. So then we have to have something that is justifiable and verifiable.
But will it stand up to old data on our challenge? That's what I'm saying. If we have to make a challenge as your old 12-year-old data, you're going to stand up and
But you've also, and I wasn't
go
trying to go
there.
back, I really wanted to ask you questions. I wasn't trying to go back and forth with you.
Okay.
So I was trying to be clear about your recommendations. One is the 0.5% you're recommending, and then 2, you're suggesting then, maybe not directly, that the city does another study very soon, because it has to have verifiable data.
If-
That's what I'm trying to be clear. Is that what you're
Could
saying?
give a small portion so that we could be included, so that we don't get left out of the bid process. And then, yes, we would wish that the sooner the better.
Right.
But long as, right now, we're left out completely. If we can just get a percent, we're in. That's what we're trying to get to, is we just don't want to be left out. Put us in at something, anything.
Yeah, it's
And we'll-
unfortunate that I cannot say that the city is completely unified on doing this. It was people of color that have consistently pushed to make this happen. And so if the data is old, it's because we had some resistance on the other side in getting this far. And now that we've gotten this far, with all these decades of pushing, we want to make sure that it makes it across the finish line, but not in a way to exclude anybody. We're going to try to put everybody possible, just recognize the decades of struggle that it has taken to get to this place. Because you have not been here in St. Louis to do this struggle. We have. And we have not gotten here easily. But there is no attempt to exclude any group that can be included and justified. Now, if we cannot at this point, let us find a way that we can do that as soon as possible so it can be done.
Can I ask you a question? Or maybe I can ask someone.
You can ask me off to the side.
Yeah,
You're not right
The
here.
question I have is, you have a
ask it,
study.
ask it rhetorically, and then we can.
Ask it rhetorically, yeah.
If the study shows 0.0002% Native American, that's why we're deemed not eligible. Put us in at the 0.0002.
Mr. Chairman, I've asked the sponsor to ask SLDC that question, so they're working on it right now. They are working on that.
Okay.
That's all I had. I just wanted to get that information.
Thank-
But please feel free. If you have some heart, give it to us so we can have it. Okay?
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Alderman Kennedy.
Chairman of another committee.
President Reed, you're up next.
Okay. No further questions.
Alderman Boyd?
Yes, out of curiosity, so you say, are you based here or are you based in Oklahoma?
The tribe is
You.
based in Oklahoma.
You.
Myself.
Yes.
I live in Oklahoma.
You live in Oklahoma? Okay. How many Indian companies, or Native American, I'm sorry, companies are you aware of that are in St. Louis doing business, or even in the region?
TSI does.
I don't have that data.
Okay, so our challenge is we have to create an ordinance and set goals based on verifiable statistical data. It's not to suggest that any group is insignificant. That's totally absurd and
I
egregious for
understand.
anybody to even want to do that, right? So that's not where we're going with this, but we want to make sure, and I think Alderman Kennedy expressed it far better than I can express it to you, but I just want to make sure that we are making a very sincere effort to do the right thing, and to do the right thing in a way that it can withstand a court challenge. Again, 6 months from now, there's data already. We get it. This study was done up until 2012. There will be an update. And if we see an opportunity to shift goals, then it's an obligation for us to do that. And then 2 years later, there's another update. And then 5 years, there's a commission of an actual study with brand new data. So this is only the beginning. And I don't want people to have a lot of anxiety and hurt feelings because for some reason they don't feel that, you know, they're included, because it's not to exclude anybody, but what it does is give every group an opportunity to do more work.
But
And I just want to make that statement and not to go back and forth. Mr.
Okay.
Chairman, I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Boyd.
I have no questions.
Okay. Alderwoman Navarro? No questions. Okay, thank you, Chief Langford.
You all.
We have two more speakers. Next up on the pro side, it looks like Jure Burks. Is that? Thank you, Mr. Burks. Let us know who you're with.
I'm Jarek Burks,
Jarek,
and I'm
excuse
with Jarek Burks, Occurring Change, Future Innovation, multifaceted character. But I think that it's a great bill. It makes me actually feel really good that St. Louis is moving in, hopefully, a unified direction. Because I know with the people that I've heard speak here today and in other places, similar faces and these collective ideas, there is no intention of excluding any race or person, individual or group. When I hear disparity, it actually it still upsets me, and I know it upsets a lot of people, but it goes a little bit further than just your race. Disparity can also be just what you look like in that moment in time, and then that's when your business or potential business can go out the window just because you don't look like something. And here in St. Louis, we have, like with all due respect, with whatever I may say, I have nothing but respect and love for people. Our census from 2010, it would be nice for us to have more of an updated census more regularly. We have 49% African American, and there's 800 American Indian in our city, and there has been a lot of push, but for there to be a collective, unified workforce and business force and economy, but we have, like Alderwoman here stated, addressing the economy or the trade and business issue will address other issues, and that's absolutely right, because we do have a pipeline from school to jail, or just straight into the streets, and trying to make it that way. So this bill addresses a lot of issues, and it allows for more unified collaboration, and that's exactly what we need because we do need more education and information and more transparency among all the groups so we can actually collectively solve these problems. So to have that serious impact and a helpful impact. You know, there's certain groups out there that receive grants for being the race that they are, and then there's another, you know, other minority groups don't receive grants for businesses. So I just wanted to, you know, state that, you know, the disparity equals, you know, suffrage, suppression, oppression, depression, and aggression. You know, and I see that we are trying to remedy the problem, and I just wanted to give you that. So thanks.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Burks? To my left, to my right? Okay.
Just tell them thanks for us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Last sign-up speaker is Carlos Ramirez.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'm Carlos Ramirez. I'm President and CEO of the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and I would like to speak on behalf of our members that we've been meeting with on this issue. And I do want to say that all of this, even though I'm listed as a con, you know, on one point essentially, I do thank the aldermen that have been taking up the challenge, SLDC, and everybody that's been trying to implement a disparity study and the results of that. And so we certainly appreciate that, and we're not arguing that anybody that's getting some work should not get it. We're just arguing that we should be included on a higher level and that we all should be included together. And so today I'd like to submit a letter that I'll share with you, and this will be the second letter I share. The first letter I had given last session when it was Board Bill 350, and so there are some pertinent points in there that I'd like to be included as well. We all know that, you know, in this policy itself, it says the City of St. Louis shall take all necessary reasonable legal action to alleviate documented disparity, ensure that all businesses are afforded the maximum opportunity for participation in the city's contracting. And I will tell you, I don't feel like we're getting that type of participation. I know that we are the fastest growing population in the metro area. The 2010 census told us that in the city, we had grown 59%. The county, 72%, the state, 79%, the metro area, 82%. And in that time since, we've had a demographer at St. Louis University tell us that the overall population of the metro area by 2040 will only grow 0.8%. Meanwhile, the Hispanic population 10 years earlier, by 2030, will grow anywhere from 65 to 85%. And the largest segment of our population is actually going to be 9 years and younger. And so when we talk about these statistics and the fact that the business census in 2017 told us there are anywhere between 3,000 and 4,000 Hispanic-owned businesses in the metro area. And for us to know that 3 of our top members alone who are in the city are eligible for, have gross revenues anywhere from 100 to 150 million, and to then get 2%, and it's actually 1.64% based on the study. So I question, are these statistics accurate even back then, let alone that when this sunsets, what will it look like then? And in a community where we're losing population and then alienating a population that has the fastest growing population and youngest population, you know, are we really doing what's best for the city? You know, yes, implementing something like this, and I believe Alderman Boyd when he says he's going to make sure that this gets upheld and that it gets monitored and that it gets implemented. I believe that, but I think that it would be a detriment to the region, certainly the city, if we're not included on a larger level. Now, if that means we redo a disparity study to really include all the members, all the certified people, the growth since then, the fact that we have so many minority-owned or Hispanic-owned businesses, then I'm all for that. Now, because I do care about the region, I'd rather that wasn't the case because it's going to stall the ability for all minorities to get this work. So I really would like for us, in this letter I also indicate there are some questions I had. I know a couple of you asked the questions about inconsistencies in the bill, and I also had some questions, and they're listed on our page 3, that it appears that some of the times they included Asians and excluded Hispanics, and my understanding of the bill was that it was mostly including African American and Hispanics, and in some portions it excludes Hispanics that we didn't think we were excluded in. So I do want to say that, and it's a little curious to me that in this bill, it wants to segment the race, or segment the goals based on race when it comes to contracts, but when we're talking about liquidated damages for workers, then we want to include everybody together. And it just seems a little inconsistent to me. And so I really would like to make sure that we're doing what's best for the region, that we continue to grow the region, and certainly not exclude significantly the fastest growing population and the youngest population in the region. Questions?
Thank you, Mr. Ramirez.
You have
Alderman Kennedy, do you have any questions for Mr. Ramirez? No.
have copies for everyone?
You know, I'm a rookie at this. I brought one.
We'll
Can we
facilitate the creation of some copies so you can distribute that letter. Thank you.
Just want to thank him
President
for,
Reed?
I just want to thank you for your comments and thank you for all the work that you're doing and creating and growing the Hispanic Chamber. And certainly, I want to make sure that you all are included within the bill. And so I'm sure that the chairman, not the chairman, but the sponsor will make any needed changes to make sure that every section is consistent throughout.
I mean, and that's what I hope for, and you know, I care about the region. You know, I work with the Economic Development Partnership as the chairman. You know, I write pieces in the community where I think we get too much negative press. I care about the region. I want it to move forward, and so, but I think it's imperative that you include us in that moving forward. Any other questions?
Alderman Howard?
Mr. Ramirez, I thank you for representing the community, and I hope that we can work this out and make a bill that is good for the region, as you said.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Alderman Navarro?
Thank you very much. Is there a number or percentage that you feel is more reflective of the Hispanic population that you would like to see in this
You know,
bill?
honestly, I would love for us to be combined. Because if we're talking about really doing what's well for the region, and even though I understand, you know, everybody keeps referring to the Richmond versus Crosand, you know, there are also other studies or other case law like this that will also be justified with combined goals. You know, so I know in this particular case, that's what they came up with. In the county, they came up with a combined goal. You know, and I know as an analogy, when Prop P happened in the county, everybody in the city was up in arms thinking we're going to lose all the good police officers to the county. Well, if the disparity study moves forward in the county as is, with the combined goals, is the city going to be worse off? Because just 3 key members of ours alone, if they decide to move to the county, that's an impact on the city as well. And so really, in a perfect world, I'd love to see it combined. Now, short of that, if we're talking about a higher number, I don't want to be unreasonable, and I'm not an expert in the statistics, so, I mean, I could say 15%, but really that's a shot in the dark. I have no idea, you know, and again, I'm not trying to say that anybody else that has disparities shouldn't be acknowledged and made whole. I'm all for it. But I also think that it's imperative for the region's growth that we be included at a higher level. And by combining it, it allows us to grow beyond the 2%. And everybody always says this is the floor, but in the history of all this happening, that's never just been the floor. And MSD is a perfect example of that.
Thank you, Mr. Ramirez. Thanks to everyone who stayed to testify. I appreciate it. And I'm gonna recognize. We've got 4 amendments in writing in front of us. I'm going to recognize Alderman Boyd on these amendments.
Mr. Chairman, before we do the amendments, I want to make something clear. I'm going to ask Leslie to come up and address the legal aspect of the percentages.
You're going to let me ask some questions then? Huh?
I mean, because this is the time to really get it right as best we can. It will not be a perfect bill, I promise you. And there's no such thing, by the way.
All right, please proceed.
While I can appreciate different groups wanting to be considered at higher levels than they are listed in the current board bill, the reason we're using the percentages that are in the board bill are because they're based on the study. And the study is using the parameters set out by case law. So what we're trying to do is just follow the law. What we're trying to do is prevent the risk of having the program challenged because we haven't followed the rules that are set out by the court. So the disparity study, again, is based on what the court has set out as the way to do this. And if we deviate from that, then we open ourselves up to the risk of not having a program that can stand up, that could be challenged, and then we would not have a program at all. So the percentages that are found in the board bill are those that we feel comfortable we can sustain if there is a court challenge. The consultant that does this all over the country. They've litigated cases. They're well aware of what is required in order to sustain a program in any given city. And so that's why we're relying on the study itself and the results of that study. Are there questions about?
So I do have a question. I mean, I understand what you just said. Some of the percentages, though, like I understand this is a different concept, but for instance, the bid discount percentages in the bill, it sounds like were not based on a study. Is that correct?
That was based on a recommendation from the consultant, based on her experience in other cities, for things that have helped the subcontractors, minority and women subcontractors
But
compete.
they're not based on local data.
I'm sorry.
But those bid discount percentages are not based on local data from the St. Louis region.
That's correct.
Okay. Alderman Kennedy, do you have any questions?
I don't have any questions.
President Reed, Alderwoman Howard.
I do have a question. Knowing the date on this data that we're looking at, is there a court test on the immediacy or the timeliness of the data that we're looking at versus what we're implementing here into law?
When you establish a program based on the disparity study, there is going to be a lag at times between the time the data is collected and the time a program is put together and legislated. The court understands that, and as long as the original study is based on data that can be supported, the program will be supported. But the concept is that the data will be looked at again periodically. So if there are changes in the data based on, collection of new data, then the study can be updated. And if there needs to be an adjustment, that can be made.
So the data provides two things, a baseline and then going back and looking at data that's acquired after implementation of the law.
Correct.
Okay, so was this data gathered by Mason
Tillman and
Tillman?
Associates. Mhm.
And how did they gather the data?
They gathered that data from city contracts. What they're looking at is the whole population of contractors in our area, that we could draw from to actually
Are these city
use.
only or regional contractors?
It's regional.
Okay, okay.
And, right, and in order to be counted as minority or women-owned businesses under the percentages that are set as goals, those firms have to be certified minority or women-owned business firms.
Okay, was there
by the
any
city.
effort to draw these businesses out if they didn't currently exist in the SLDC database?
in
I mean,
terms-
if they, are they, you looked at the database that the city currently uses?
We looked at
of minority
contracts.
contracts that were
Right.
executed by the city?
Can I add?
Sure.
Yes, we looked at all those that were certified and those that were not certified. So the idea was to understand what the available population would
In the
be
region
In
here.
the region, the
Okay.
available population.
So was TSI counted in that availability, or do we know?
I don't know, your company was not certified. We were not certified. Okay, but were you in business in 2012? Okay. So we would have counted them as being a company, but not certified.
Okay, okay. All right, so how, when we go to update this in 6 months, how current will that data be?
Well, if we were to initiate another study, it would be based on the data. Obviously, we would, normally the contract period is the end in a fiscal year. So it'd probably be the last fiscal year where we have complete data such that they can provide it.
So it would probably be a 2-year lag or so?
It could be 2017, for sure.
Okay, so we could use 2017 data. Okay. Okay, thank you. That's all I have. Yeah, but they do business, they serve, no, they serve St. Louis Public Schools. It was probably before they were deemed a minority business. Okay. Right.
But every day their business is being deemed minority. One of the things on this list right now is, okay, use 2017 data. We'd order it within, I think, a year before. So we still have at least a 2-year lag. Yeah.
It just seems to me that, I know, but it just seems, I know. It just seems so, with all the technology we have to get there, we should be able to do a lot better, but. Okay, what are we doing here? Next fiscal year. That doesn't.
All right, we're going to adjourn that interlude for a moment. I'm gonna I'm gonna recognize Alderman Boyd briefly here, and then I think we'll wrap this up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. From listening to some of the testimony, it seems like the bill is prohibiting certain groups of people from doing business with the city of St. Louis. So let's be clear, notwithstanding the fact that Native American, for example, did not make a statistical number, does not mean that Native Americans are barred from competing on projects in the city of St. Louis. Each group can still do business in the city of St. Louis. So I just want to make that clear, because what it sounds like is that we're prohibiting certain groups from being able to actively participate in doing business with the city of St. Louis. So I just want to put that out there and make that clear.
Okay, sure.
And unfortunately, we have issues with versions of our bill, and it's becoming so confusing that it's probably more practical that we just come back with a committee substitute and give some clean language on the bill.
That sounds good. So we have, thank you, Alderman Boyd. We're going to work through those technical aspects. There's an opportunity to do those things via an amendment or via a committee substitute. We already have a legislation committee hearing scheduled for 9 a.m. on Tuesday. We're going to put Board Bill 270 on that agenda, so we're going to hear this bill again on Tuesday. We are not going to spend 3 hours on it on Tuesday. But we're going to work through whatever those changes need to be made, and I think we're going to talk to SLDC a little bit between now and then. So I'm going to make a motion that the Legislation Committee adjourns.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Legislation Committee is adjourned. Thank you.